Welcome to this year's first installment of Cultural Proficiency Training, brought to you by your Educator Effectiveness Academy team. We meet 3 times over the course of the school year to discuss Frederick County Public Schools practices and policies, particularly related to cultural proficiency and its connection to Danielson's 2013 Framework for Teaching. Throughout this training, you will encounter several checks for understandings, as well as a short reflection at the end of the module.
Please take a second to review the outcomes for today's training. If you need to hit the pause button to read them further, please do so now. Take a second to check out the norms for our meetings. We must respect that each of us comes with a valuable history and varied perspectives. It's very important that we listen to understand each other. This year, we will examine the relationship between effective instruction and the diversity we and our students bring into the interactions we have with each other. Take a second to reflect from our session last spring and how you see it connecting to the quote above.
In Frederick County Public Schools, there are 2 aspects of cultural proficiency. We look at our values, principles, attitudes, behaviors, policies, and practices as an organization, and if we are effectively meeting the needs of all those we serve. As an organization, we have to look within first and not point to others as the reason why we cannot effectively work across cultures. This year, the organizational work with cultural proficiency will continue. This year at Ballinger Creek Middle School, we will look at the aspect of cultural proficiency.
As an individual, what are my values, principles, attitudes, behaviors, and practices that enable me to work effectively across cultures? I must reflect on my own practices and how they're influenced by my background and experiences first. That reflection helps me better understand why, at times, my interactions are effective or ineffective. I say ineffective because cultural proficiency is not a place where one stays once they get there. All of us find ourselves in one-on-one or group situations that are new. At times, we are able to work effectively across cultures, and at other times we are not. The key is knowing when we are not being effective. That starts by looking inside and not pointing the finger outside. We each have ways in which we learn most effectively. For example, I learn under certain conditions better than others. Some of those conditions involve noise and loud music, and that's because I come from an area where there was always things happening outside my neighborhood. And so that music helped me block out what was happening in my neighborhood. However, my husband needs it totally quiet and you can't even cough.
Thinking about how I learn is important. It influences how I teach. If you recall, last spring we shared this visual that shows some of the many things that make each of us who we are. It contributes to the wealth of diversity around us. Culture is multifaceted and dynamic. We each bring all the aspects of who we are into each of our interactions with colleagues, the families of our students, and community members. So do they. I have to be aware that what I bring into each of those settings impacts my ability to effectively or ineffectively get to know and interact with others. The same holds true for interactions with students. Just as I have a certain way of getting to know and interacting with others, so do they. In my daily interactions, the only actions I can really control are my own. If a colleague, student, parent is having a day that's causing them to interact with me ineffectively, the only thing I have control over is my response. This requires self-reflection on whether I'm responding in a manner that allows me to interact in a manner that builds up or tears down relationships. As educators, we know the work we do is about people, our students. In a few days, we welcome our students back and have the opportunity to learn about them while teaching them content that prepares them to be successful when they leave us. Knowing how our individual backgrounds and experiences influence our interactions with students will help us to more effectively plan lessons that allow us to learn about who they are. The goal is to then plan instruction and teach in a manner that best meets their needs. This may require that we learn and implement instructional practices that best serve our current group of students.
As we go through the year, each of us will be asked to think about this and similar questions. We've spent some time doing personal reflection. Now we're going to apply that to how we get to know our students and demonstrate our knowledge about them and their interest. This knowledge is intricately connected to effective instructional practices.
Thinking about what we just talked about with cultural proficiency, let's think further about how we get to know students. Domain 1, Component B, demonstrating knowledge of students. Take a look at the component sheet and read over the rubric and possible critical attributes and examples and identify connections between cultural proficiency and how we demonstrate knowledge of our students.
At this time, as you've taken some time to reflect, respond, and react to the connections between cultural proficiency and component 1B and how those connections impact our instructional practice, we'd like you to reflect on the form that is provided in the link within this webinar.
Thank you for your time.